We are what we eat. We all agree about that, but there is vast disagreement about which foods are the healthiest. Looks like we have the makings of a debate. The resolution for our Oxford-style debate reads as follows: an animal foods, low-carb-centered diet is unhealthy compared with a 90+% plant-based diet that excludes sugar and refined grain products. I should emphasize that both speakers, both debaters, eschew sugar and refined grain products and will not be debating that. But clearly, the debate is animal foods is unhealthy compared with essentially a 90% plant-based diet. You have 6 more minutes to cast your vote. Please do so if you have not already done so. Vote only if you're going to remain throughout the duration of the evening, so that we can have you vote a second time. Walk to the corner of that room. I'm pointing to it, where you'll find the ballot box, the voting booth, and cast your vote. Black card for the resolution, red card against the resolution, white card undecided about the resolution. In a few more minutes, I'm going to close the voting. We'll do a before and after, and whichever side moves the needle in his or her favor will be deemed the winner of the debate. In other words, again, if you have a devious mind, you might see a way to game the system, but neither side wants you to do that because it would be unethical. There will be an opportunity during the debate to ask questions of the debaters. The limitations on the questions, I'll be repeating this later, but let me say now as well, no questions about the environment or ethical issues about which both debaters have agreed. Ethics and the environment are a fascinating and relevant question, but that's for another day. This is only about the issue of food and personal health, strictly that, and that's where your questions should be addressed. Second, no personal testimonials about your own diet when you ask a question. If you've been thriving on the paleo diet, kosher style, we are happy for you, but we cannot regard that as relevant since we don't know enough about you to assess your personal anecdote. Now let me introduce our superbly qualified debaters. Speaking for the Affirmative, John Mackey, co-founder and co-CEO of Whole Foods Market. John, would you please come up and take your station here? John has appeared at Junto before, speaking about his book, Conscious Capitalism, and he is now working on a book about healthy diet. He will be offering his own book for sale, as well as books on healthy diet by Dr. Joel Fuhrman, who consults on the programs on healthy diet run for Whole Foods employees. John, I have a question for you. I've asked before, why does Whole Foods sell meat, butter, cheese, and eggs if you believe these foods are unhealthy?
My very first store was called Saferway. It was a vegetarian store. It didn't sell any beer, no meat, no beer wine, no sugar, no white flour, no coffee, no tea. Very pure, no business. When we moved that store and relocated to Whole Foods Market, we decided we were going to sell what our customers wanted to buy within the framework of our values regarding whole natural foods. So there you have it. I'd like to have you vote those products out of our stores, but as long as you keep voting for them with your pocketbooks, we're going to keep selling them.
Thank you, John. Speaking for the negative, Nina Teicholz. I've been mispronouncing her name for a long time. Nina, would you please come up? I can call you Nina, not Miss Teicholz. Nina is the author of The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. Deemed Best Book of 2014 by The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, Mother Jones, Kirkus Reviews, and Library Journal. Also, the most memorable healthcare book of 2014 by Forbes. It's also received a favorable write-up in the British Medical Journal. Nina's book is also being offered for sale in the back. Nina, I have to ask, do you ever eat vegetables for breakfast or lunch? And if so, what are some of those vegetables?
Quick, I got to think of something. I do not eat I do not eat vegetables for breakfast. I don't know too many people who do. And I eat lots of vegetables. I eat a lot of leafy greens, all kinds of vegetables. They are part of a healthy diet. My point is just that these other foods are also part of a healthy diet, and they just have to be let out of jail and allowed to be part of the picture.
Looks like we have the makings of a debate. Thank you, Nina. And again, let me emphasize again that this debate will be an intellectual sprint. Real insight only comes from the intellectual marathon of reading the books that are offered for sale. Again, toward the end of the debate, Whole Foods will be bringing in some refreshments that will induce you to remain. If you haven't as yet voted, please get up right now and do so now. Walk to the corner there because the debate is about to begin. We want your vote. Are you for the resolution? Are you against the resolution? Or are you undecided? Vote what you believe without fear or favor. The initial vote is going to be closed now, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. For those who arrived too late, we can accept no more votes. But we want you to vote now and vote later. John Mackey will speak for the affirmative. He has 17 minutes in which to do that. We have a timekeeper who will be keeping track of John, and we have, of course, somebody with a cane. Pull him off stage if he goes over time. John, please take it away.
Do we have a clicker? Yes? Don't start my clock yet. All right. Well, first I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I'm always impressed with New Yorkers' hardiness. I'm from Texas, and we never snows. I don't know how you people live up here. How do you get around? It's crazy. It's crazy, crazy. But thanks for coming out. And so let me get cracking, because I only got 17 minutes, and I have a lot to talk about. First, America is sick and fat and dying. And the solution is so simple to understand. We must eat a whole foods, mostly plant-based diet.
Is everybody hear John okay in the back? A little louder?
Sorry,
Okay,
as loud as I talk. How's that, better? Better?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. That particular diet has shown to keep us trim and healthy. It helps us prevent diseases and extends our longevity. And I'm going to give evidence to that tonight. A low-carb, animal foods-based diet can lose weight in the short run. I think that science has proven that it can lose weight in the short run. But in the long run, it shortens your life. And I'll present evidence of that as well. This is not a debate about low fats versus low carbs. Ms. Teicholz, her book largely gives a great deal of evidence of comparing low fat versus low carb. But I believe that the low fat diet that she compares the low carb against is what I would call a straw man. It's full of refined carbohydrates, it's full of sugar, it's full of refined oils. It's not a healthy diet. Low carb looks good in comparison to that kind of diet. It does not look good when you compare it to whole foods, mostly plant-based diet. But she is telling people exactly what they want to believe. People would like to believe they can eat all the meat, all the eggs, all the fish, all the cheese, all the butter, all the lard that they would want, and that's going to make them healthy. But it doesn't. It doesn't make you healthy. These are foods that will shorten your life, and you will come to discover someday when you're dealing with heart disease or cancer that you made a wrong dietary choice. In this debate, I'm going to give evidence that a whole foods, 90% plant-based diet will keep you thin, it will keep you healthy, it will keep your immune system strong, you'll avoid diseases like heart disease and cancer. And I'm going to present evidence that a low-carb, animal-based diet does exactly the opposite. Okay, page down. The first thing to understand is we've had a 25% increase in our calorie consumption in the United States in the past 40 years. And that's resulted in increasing obesity. Look how much our obesity has gone up. 69% of adult Americans are now overweight, 36% obese, and that directly traces back to what we're eating. We're eating too many calories. And this is not just a problem in the United States, it's a problem all over the world. The whole world is getting fat at an increasingly rapid rate. Why? If you go back and look at humanity as we evolved, calorie density was extremely rare in nature. We could not find foods that were calorie dense. We found foods that were full of fiber, and we had to eat large quantities of these foods to get enough nutrition to just stay alive. And so when we found foods that were calorie dense, we like them. They taste good. We like fat, and we like sugar, and we like refined carbohydrates. These give a buzz to our brains. We feel sated. It's so good and so delicious, and we love them, and we are quickly addicted to them. And the whole food industry, and this is the business I'm in, has created strategies to keep people hooked on calorie-dense foods. My opponent says that we've cut back on our total fat consumption. The most obvious one today is that the American population slashed its fat and saturated fat consumption by 11% and increased carbohydrates by 25%, according to our nutritional guidelines. But we have clearly not become healthier. In reality, we've increased our total calories 25% in the last 40 years. Total sugars are up 10%. We've increased refined carbohydrates through grains and cereal products 42%. Our added fats and oils are up 66%. Dairy and dairy fats are up 18%. Fruits are up 25%. Meat, eggs, and nuts are only up 3%. Vegetables, believe it or not, we're eating fewer vegetables today than we did 40 years ago. But total fat from all sources in the United States in the last 40 years has gone up 20%. Here you can see the calories per macronutrient played out. You see that there's been a rise in our carbohydrate consumption, and there's been a rise in our fat consumption. She plays games with where the P is, but in reality, calories are up 25%, carbohydrate consumption's up, and fat consumption's up. Cardiovascular disease. It's a sad tale. Every year, 1.5 million Americans will have a heart attack or a stroke. And more than 800,000 more people every day die from a heart attack or stroke than died at 911. But my opponent believes that cardiovascular disease is new in America. Indeed, the disturbing story of nutritional science over the course of the last half-century looks something like this. Scientists responding to the skyrocketing number of heart disease cases, which had gone from a mere handful in 1900 to being the leading cause of death by 1950, hypothesized that dietary fat, especially of the saturated kind, due to its effects on cholesterol, was to blame. Is this a true statement? Actually, it's not. Cardiovascular disease has been a problem and one of the leading causes of death in the United States as long as we can recorded deaths. You can see, hopefully you can see, that heart disease was killing 137.4 people out of every 100,000 people in the population each year, and cerebral vascular disease was killing 106.9. If you look, in 2010, heart disease has actually gone up, but cerebral vascular disease deaths have gone down, but together, combined, they're about exactly the same as there were back in 1900. See the trend line? The top black line shows deaths from cardiovascular disease. We're about the same place we were 110 years ago. Let me make my case against low-carb and high animal food diets. My opponent argues that we have been eating a low-fat, near-vegetarian diet. It's possible to think of the low-fat, near-vegetarian diet of the past half-century as an uncontrolled experiment on the entire American population, significantly altering our traditional diet with unintended consequences. Here's the standard American diet. Here's what people eat in America. We eat 54% of our calories from processed foods like white flour, sugar, and oil. We eat almost a third of our calories from animal foods. That does not sound like a near-vegetarian diet to me. We only eat 15% of our calories come from whole plant foods. Only 15%. My friends, that is the problem. I believe, my opponent, we both agree that the 54% of processed food should be eliminated from the diet. I believe Nina believes that as well. It's where we're going to take those 54% and put them. She wants to put more of them into animal foods, get that percentage up, and I want to get the animal foods percentage down and put it all into eating a much more plant-based diet. That is basically the essence of what we're debating about tonight. Is the consumption of animal foods declining? My opponent argues, so what did we eat before the 1940s? There was a common misconception that we were primarily a plant-eating people. The theory was based on really bad data. In fact, we ate 3 to 4 times more red meat, 3 to 4 times more butter, 5 to 6 times more lard. We were not plant eaters in the past, but we ate a heck of a lot of meat. But since 1940, our consumption of meat has gone up 70% since 1940. Across the world, animal food consumption is exploding. Look what's happening. Interestingly, at the same time, the obesity rate is going up. We are cheesemongers in the United States. Look at this. Back in 1915, we ate about 3 pounds of cheese per capita per person a year. Now we eat 33.5 pounds of cheese. I don't eat any. Somebody out there is eating 67 pounds of cheese. Are animal foods nutrient dense? My opponent says, moreover, we now know that there are many good reasons to eat animal foods like red meat, cheese, eggs, and whole milk. They are particularly dense in nutrients, far more so than fruits and vegetables. The only thing animal foods are dense in is fat. That's the only thing. A little, how many fiber? They're very low in micronutrients. Let's take a look at it. The only foods worse than animal foods in micronutrient density are sugar, refined oils, and refined grains. If you go from the bottom, then you see cheese, full-fat dairy, red meat, eggs. The healthiest of the animal foods from a nutrient density standpoint is fish. The plant foods, those are the foods that are nutrient dense. Those are the foods that have micronutrients in it on a per-calorie basis. The healthiest foods you can eat from nutrient density are by far are the raw leafy green vegetables, solid green vegetables. Veggies rock, man. Those are the foods we need to be eating. All major studies show an increase in all-cause disease and death from animal-based low-carbohydrate diets. No major studies of high-carbohydrate diets show similar effects. Here's a study. 17 studies followed 700,000 people. Low-carbohydrate diets were associated with a 31% increase in deaths from all causes. To quote from the study, our systematic review and meta-analyses of worldwide reports suggested that low-carbohydrate diets were associated with a significantly higher risk of all-cause mortality in the long run. These findings support the hypothesis that the short-term benefits of low-carbohydrate diets for weight loss are potentially irrelevant. What difference does it make if you can lose a few pounds if you're going to die sooner? In other studies, low-carb diets with increased amounts of animal products associated with premature death. Scientists followed over 85,000 women and 44,000 men for more than 20 years. Low-carbohydrate, animal-based, 23% increase in death from all causes. Interestingly enough, the low-carbohydrate diets that were high vegetable-based had a 20% lower death rate from all causes. Red meat consumption and mortality, 2 prospective cohort studies. The Harvard School of Public Health completed the longest, largest study ever done on meat in 2012. They followed 120,000 people for 22 to 28 years and found a 13% increased risk of dying for each serving of red meat eaten a day. And a serving is only 2 to 3 ounces. So if you're putting down a 16-ounce steak every day, you are radically increasing your risk of death from all causes. And processed meats are far worse. You see 20% there. Here we have a study that shows, this followed Swedish women. 43,000 women, ages 30 to 49 years of age, were followed for more than 15 years. Overall, a 60% increased risk of cardiovascular events occurred in those adhering to the low-carb, high-protein diet. Their conclusion, low-carbohydrate, high-protein diets are associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Here you can see it graphically played out. Higher animal food consumption, greater cardiovascular disease risk. This study followed people that had heart attacks. Hey, worst diet you can eat if you have heart attacks? High animal food diets. They're associated with 33% higher all-cause mortality and 51% higher cardiovascular mortality in this cohort of people that had heart attacks. 1,000+ studies confirm red meat and processed meat increases the risk of colon cancer. Plant-based diet consisting of whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and beans decreases the risk of colon cancer. Animal protein and breast cancer relationship confirmed by the International Agency of Research on Cancer. Here we see 12 types of cancer were identified with a lag of 15 to 25 years between. This is with 87 different countries participating in it. Here you can see breast cancer. The calories from animal products, the more calories from animal products you were getting, the higher the risk of breast cancer turned out 19 years later. Let me quickly make the case for 90% plant-based diets. The whole foods plant-based diet, 100% whole foods, 90 to 100% plant-based, no refined sugars, grains, or oils, whole food starches are the main calories, nutrient density, unlimited fruits and vegetables. Here's what it looks like. Starches and not animal foods have been the main calorie source for humanity for over 10,000 years and probably much longer. Societies that have no coronary artery disease are 90+% plant-based. We had the Tarahumara Indians, rural China, Uganda, and Papua New Guinea Highlanders. What they have in common, they all eat mostly plant-based diets, mostly starches, and they don't get heart disease. The work that we've done in the blue zones shows all the documented longest-lived societies have been whole foods, 90% plant-based, no exceptions. I challenge my opponent to name any societies that are low-carb, animal-centered, that have longevity. Okinawan longevity diet. These folks ate 70% of their calories from sweet potatoes, 12% from rice, 7% from grains and wheat. It's a 90% starch-based diet. They have the most documented people that live past 100 in the world. I think it's very hard to be healthy on a vegan diet. It just doesn't have the nutrients that you need to sustain human health. Is that true? The Seventh-day Adventist Health Study says it's not true. The vegans have lowest BMI of 23.6. The vegan Adventists who ate nuts and seeds, exercised, and did not smoke were the longest-lived cohort ever discovered in modern times. The men lived 14 years longer. The women lived 10 years longer. Dean Ornish's lifestyle heart trial, this man successfully proved you could reverse heart disease on a vegetarian diet, low-fat, high-carbohydrates diets. Caldwell Esselstyn has proven, again, you can reverse heart disease. He had, on a total fat diet of 10%, 89% of his patients who had cardiovascular disease were able to reverse their disease. Only one had a 0.6% experienced a coronary event. 11% of the patients were non-adherent, and those who were non-adherent to his plan had a 62% experienced a coronary event.
Thank you.
I'm out of time. I will come back to this in the rebuttal.
Thank you, John. Now, Teicholz will have the opportunity to speak for 17 minutes for the negative.
Yes? All right, so hello everybody, and also thank you for being here and coming out on a night like tonight. And I want to say a couple things up front, which is, one is that I respect people's choices about what they eat and what they choose to eat. And I myself ate mainly a vegetarian diet, some chicken and fish for 2 decades. And so I'm not here to prescribe a diet to anybody tonight. But we're just here to talk about what the science says. I took a deep dive into nutrition science nearly a decade ago and spent 9 years looking at all the studies that I could possibly get my hands on in nutrition science to write my book. And we're really just here to try to figure out, what does the science say about diet and health? And I just wrote my book because I really wanted to understand the truth about it. I didn't have any industry funding to write my book and no expectation that my book would ever sell. It's a book of science and history and politics and thousands of footnotes. So I'm also going to just dive in because there is so little time. But the first thing I want to say, what I'm going to talk about tonight is, can I show that a low-carb diet with animal foods is at least as healthy as a vegan diet? That's what my goal is tonight, to be successful in this resolution. And then I'm going to also argue beyond that, actually, which is, and is a kind of bonus points if I can, to say, is there anything unhealthy about a near vegan diet? Could it possibly be unhealthy? And is it possible that a low-carb diet with animal foods might actually be healthier? So let's take the first point first, which is, what is the evidence base for a near vegan diet? And I have to kind of give you a little lesson in scientific evidence. I'm sorry, we just have to take this slight detour. There are 2 types of scientific evidence, which are epidemiological studies and clinical trials. And they offer very different degrees of proof. So we're just going to talk about that a little bit. Epidemiology is a science where they follow large groups of people over long periods of time. They ask them what they eat, and then they try to see who gets diseases. And they try to link your diet with the outcome, your outcome, death, disease, whatever it is. These are studies that can only ever show association and not causation. They're meant to generate hypotheses. They're meant to suggest ideas, and then you can go and test them in rigorous clinical trials. But there are, and I just want to show you why epidemiological studies cannot be used as proof. So here is one of these graphs that Mr. Mackey showed, showing a seemingly perfect correlation between something. In this case, it shows that there's a perfect correlation between people who use the internet and who have breast cancer, which suggests the logical conclusion is, if you're going to use this epidemiological study as proof, you would say using the internet causes breast cancer. And here's the problem with epidemiology. Because there are so many other things that come in. Maybe the internet, maybe it's a matter of sitting in front of your chair the whole time. You don't measure and you didn't measure that. You try to adjust for that. Maybe it's that maybe it's something that you can't even think about that causes breast cancer, like you wouldn't even think to measure. Maybe they're kind of electronic rays coming out of your computer that give you breast cancer. And it's something that you haven't measured. And this is what happens in why epidemiological studies go wrong, because there are many things that affect relationships that you don't know about. Here are a couple examples of where epidemiology went wrong. We had policies for decades, women took hormone replacement therapy, people took vitamin E supplements. That was based on epidemiological studies that were highly suggestive, just like the graphs that Mr. Mackey showed. And there was also some mechanistic data, it's called, which is data from animal studies that was also very suggestive, and that kind of whole body of evidence made people think that these were good ideas. But it turned out that they weren't, and that, that thousands of women died needlessly from doing hormone replacement therapy. So this is like a kind of a look at the failures of epidemiology. This is a 2005 JAMA study by Stanford professor John Ioannidis. He looked at epidemiological claims that had been tested in clinical trials, the kind of scientific study that can show proof, found that 5 out of 6 of them could not be confirmed. Another study looked at just nutritional epidemiological findings, so just about nutrition, found that 0 of them were confirmed. So, and this is the problem with the evidence for the studies that Mr. Mackey cites. There's a China study, there's a Seventh-day Adventist study, which is full of problems of confounding. There's the EPIC study in Europe. There's the Swedish study. there's an 80 to 100% chance, based on the slide that I just showed you, that these findings are wrong. And the reason is that there are so many factors that, that confound these. They're called confounders. So vegetarians or near vegetarians are people who care and are concerned about their health. They have been shown in studies to smoke less, drink less, exercise more, go to their doctor more, be more involved in communities, be more, have more of a communal life. All those things are related to reduced mortality and better health outcomes. Who are meat eaters for the last 50 years? People who don't listen to anything their doctor tells them. People who have never been to a nutritionist. People who, just a group of people who have all these other unhealthy behaviors. And that is what messes up these studies. I can tell you that one of the studies decided, the Nurses' Health Study, they don't even measure sugar. They have no way of measuring sugar. That's the biggest ever epidemiological study. And I talked to the leader. They said, they try to actually control for all these factors, but they don't measure sugar. So which of these factors leads to better health or worse health, we just can't know. So we cannot really use epidemiological evidence to support proof. Let's go on to the clinical trials. What are the clinical trials for a near-vegan diet, to show that a near-vegan diet is healthy? There's Dean Ornish's study. Yes, that was on 22 men for 1 year. Which should just immediately tell you it's a tiny study. And there were 19 controls. But in addition to that, what his outcome measure were scans. He said he's the only person to ever be able to measure to actually reverse heart disease. A scan is where you actually look at the artery. It turns out that it's not just the shrinking of the artery, even though that's very tempting to say, the shrinking of the artery that causes a heart attack. It turns out that it's a certain kind of unstable breakaway plaque that causes clots. It's not shown in those scans. Your arteries can narrow, and that is no indication of your heart attack risk. Whereas in his study, he found that his diet would reliably reduce HDL, which is your good cholesterol going down, which means possibly increasing risk. But even all that aside, it's a multifactorial trial. He did not just change their diet. They did yoga, exercise, supplements, meditation. They went to a kind of a house, a retreat in Marin. The controls got none of those, got no attention. So what if he improved heart disease? Was it from the diet? Was it from the meditation? Was it from the supplements? Was it from the exercise? You don't know. And in the end, at the 5-year follow-up, it turned out that 2 people had died in his experimental group and only 1 in the control group. So what are the other clinical trials on the near-vegan diet? Again, now we're talking about the evidence that could actually be shown to be proof. The reason why clinical trials are better is let's say I took this room, I split you into 2 groups, and I give these people a vegan diet and you guys get the animal fats diet. I can assume, because I'm randomly splitting you up, I can assume that all these other things that we can't measure, whether or not you spend a lot of time in front of your computer or you go to religious services or whatever else you might do in your life, that they'll be randomly distributed. So these are 2 groups, we're controlling for all those other factors, and the only thing we're measuring is the intervention. That's why clinical trials work, and that's why they're really the only kind of evidence you can use. What are the other clinical trials for a near-vegan diet? There was one study on 100 people that was a vegan versus a low-fat diet. So, we agree the low-fat diet is a failed diet. That wasn't vegan versus, so, pretty much any diet looks better than the low-fat diet. And then the other studies that Mr. Mackey cited are the studies by Esseltyn and there's others by Neil Barnard. Those were not controlled. So you have no idea. You can't, without a control group, because if I tell all you people, you're going to go on my diet, and I take you to the doctor, and I give you exercise and meditate, whatever I do to help you, I have no idea what would happen if I did all those things to another, what would happen to another group that didn't have all those interventions. You need to be able to compare groups. And without controls, we really can't say anything. And also in Esseltyn's study, they also had large doses of statins. So that's all the clinical trial data for a near-vegan diet, which is tiny. What's the historical claims? John Mackey always says that all known civilizations have had their primary source of starches and vegetables, and I'm just saying that Let's look at some other examples. Here are long-lived male population with high cholesterol intake in Ireland. They're dairy farmers living into their 70s. Their diet is high in milk, cream, butter, eggs, bacon, beef. And there's the quote from Herodotus saying, the Goths, or the Getas as they were called, they were milk drinkers and had great longevity. All right, here's another, I call these ugly facts because Thomas Huxley, the British biologist, said, a great hypothesis can be slayed with a single ugly fact. So we're just going through some of those ugly facts. The Maasai warriors ate exclusively milk, blood, and meat. No obesity, no diabetes, very low cholesterol, didn't go up with age. They took 600 electrocardiographs, couldn't find hardly any traces of heart attack. They followed a group of them to Nairobi to see if there was some freak genetic exception of these people. They started eating like the people in Nairobi, and their blood cholesterol levels went up, and they looked like the people there, started gaining weight. Ugly Facts 3 through 332, a meta-analysis of 229 hunter-gatherer societies documented in ethnographic studies. Conclusion: wherever and whenever it is ecologically possible, hunter-gatherers consume high amounts, 45 to 65% of energy as animal food. Okay, but aren't vegetarians especially long-lived? You have the Okinawans, the Blue Zone populations, and I'm just going to say here the problem with those studies are several. But one of them is when you ask somebody what their diet is at one point in their life, diet is very hard to measure, first of all. Secondly, you don't know what they ate in childhood. There's theories that heart disease starts in the womb. They could have had a very different diet when they were young. You're taking a single sampling at a moment in time. The Okinawans fried their vegetables in lard. The Blue Zones certainly ate some meat. And one population that I did look at is the Cretan Islanders, who were supposed to be very long-lived. And I went back and looked at what they ate. It turns out that the thing that best correlated with their low rates of heart disease was the absence of sugar. And that is something that these other populations have too. Maybe it's the absence of sugar, and that's what's related to longevity. But you really don't know when you're looking at somebody at age 90. You don't even know if they're 90, first of all. It's very hard to certify people's ages. You don't know what they ate their whole lives. What is the historical data on populations documented eating 10% of animal foods or less? There's none. Okay, so we've gone through the types of evidence: scientific, weak, inconclusive epidemiological evidence, clinical trials on fewer than 125 people, and no historical evidence. So what is the evidence to show that a low-carb diet with animal foods is unhealthy? There's all that data that you see about red meat. Again, that's from epidemiological studies. Those red meat eaters, they're tiny associations. They're 1.2, 1.3. The study that you had up there was the ones about low-carb diets being bad. All tiny. They're 1.2 or 1.3. Just to give you a sense of where epidemiology can say something interesting, it's like smoking and lung cancer. That's a difference of 35-fold. We're talking about differences of 1 or 1.2, 1.3. Even the National Cancer Institute itself said that below 2, below a level of 2, we're talking about relative risk, that it's not even worth considering. So we've avoided these foods for many years because they contain saturated fats. Since the late 1950s, there's been a hypothesis that saturated fats cause your cholesterol to go up, clog your arteries, and give you a heart attack. That's a whole story there. But basically, in the last few years, there's been 2 large meta-analyses by independent groups of scientists, including some from Cambridge and Harvard, University of California, Berkeley. Both those meta-analyses have looked at all the data and concluded that saturated fats cannot, after all, be said to cause heart disease. We've avoided animal foods for all these years based on their saturated fat content, and the science really shows that that was never good science and has now been really disproven. Saturated fat intake and death rates in Europe. WHO data is showing the more saturated fat you eat, your death rate goes down. Now I'm going to see if I can earn any bonus points in this time remaining I have. What is the evidence that the near-vegan diets might actually be bad for health? It turns out vegetarians don't really live longer, but the main the fruits and vegetables cannot be shown to protect cancer. But there have actually been large clinical trials where they took out animal foods and replaced them with plant-based fats, soy protein. Those were huge studies, clinical trials, again, done in the 1970s, the biggest clinical trials ever done in mental hospitals, highly controlled settings where you could control what people ate. Those found, these are the 4 biggies, they found that there was possibly a slight decline in heart disease rates among the people on the plant-based oil diet, plant-based foods and oils, but there was no reduction in overall mortality because those people died of much higher rates of cancer. They had higher rates of suicide and accidental deaths, violent deaths from violent causes. There was no reduction in overall mortality. There's been quite a lot of work, by the way, on this issue of suicide, and it turns out that vegetarians in quite a number of studies have been found to have higher rates of depression, mental problems. It may be because of cholesterol depletion in the brain. I mean, there's quite a lot of work being done on that. I know people think that's crazy. Here's a study of Maasai warriors versus their neighboring tribe, called the Akikuyu, done in the 1920s. The Akikuyu had a diet that sounds very much like a whole foods diet. Cereals, tubers, plantains, legumes, green leaves. This is a study on 8,000 men. The vegetarians were found more likely to suffer bone deformities, dental caries, anemia, lung disease, ulcers, and blood disorders. The Maasai, that warrior I showed you earlier, more likely to have rheumatoid arthritis. The Maasai were 5 inches taller on average, broader shoulders, narrower waist, were more muscle mass. They had 50% stronger, more capacity for work. They actually tested their strength. This is getting to the nutrient density. Yeah, I'm going to have to finish mine later, too. Question, I don't know where the nutrient density chart that you comes from, but this actually lists the nutrients and the amounts in them. You can see that beef liver, beef are much higher in nutrients than blueberries and kale. Here's nutrient density by a higher protein diet. And an important part of this is that the nutrients be bioavailable. At the top is beef steak, followed by fish, followed by eggs, then lamb steak, then yogurt, then tofu, then cheese. Chicken breast is at the bottom. This is 25 grams of protein. If you get it from quinoa, it's 666 calories. If you get it from beef, it's 154 calories. And what is the evidence that a low-carb diet with animal foods is healthy? We're going to skip with the epidemiological evidence because we don't believe that. The clinical trial evidence. There have been many dozens of clinical trials now on thousands of people showing that low-carb is better than low-fat. Okay, we don't believe in low-fat, but it shows you the low-carb diet is very effective. And I'll have to come back to mine, too.
Thank you. 7 minutes of rebuttal from the affirmative. 7 minutes of rebuttal from the affirmative. And are you ready, John? And,
ready to go.
Yes. Yeah.
There are many doctors that are reversing diseases with plant-based, whole plant-based foods. The Pritikin Center has been doing it for almost 40 years. John McDougall, Joel Fuhrman, they're actually both here tonight because I want you to, maybe after the debate, you can go introduce yourselves to these guys. And these are two mentors. They're both, I think, medical geniuses. I've watched these guys heal thousands of people in my company from obesity, diabetes, and reversing heart disease. And also Neil Barnard. Something we do at Whole Foods we call the Total Health Immersion. We have taken 3,000 of our sickest team members, those who are obese, those who have diabetes, and those who have heart disease, and we put them in a week-long program, medically supervised. Dr. Fuhrman and Dr. McDougall are two of the doctors we work with. And the results have been absolutely amazing. I didn't realize you could cure type 2 diabetes so quickly, but you can cure it in less than 30 days if you change their diet. We've had dozens of team members lose 100 pounds in less than a year. Here's a couple of success stories. Store team leader Marty Jenkins, here he's lost over 70 pounds. He was type 2 diabetic. His blood pressure dropped from 156/96 to 115/75. His blood sugar now tests between 70 and 80. This is my favorite example. Mylon Ross, this guy's now lost over 100 pounds in only 10 months. His blood pressure dropped from 145/95 to 100/65. He's healthier than he's been in 20 years, and he's not felt this well in many decades. These immersions are open to the public. If you're interested, contact patricia.petty@wholefoods.com. In terms of rebutting some of the things Nina said, quick question. How many people here believe that smoking causes lung cancer and leads to a shortened lifespan? Raise your hand. There's never been a randomized control study that proves that. And the tobacco companies argued for decades this very point. Oh, you can't prove anything from these observational studies. We would all know people who would smoke and then they would die at a young age, but that's not proof. It's not a controlled, randomized study. Well, you can't do a randomized control study over diet over decades. You can only observe people. You see what they eat, you track them, and you draw your conclusions. I'm looking for her to put up some observational studies that show that low-carb, animal-centered diets result in longer life. She didn't do that in her first go-around. In terms of dismissing the Seventh-day Adventist studies, that's ridiculous. I mean, these guys don't smoke and they don't drink. So they are all living the same type of lifestyle, but the vegans and the vegetarians have better health results. So they are a cohort that you can't dismiss it by saying there are other factors involved. Clearly, diet was the big factor that made the difference for those guys. I'm glad some of the Irish people live into their 70s, but I don't consider that very long-lived. In terms of the Maasai, the hearts and aorta of 50 Maasai men were collected at autopsy. These pastoral people were exceptionally active and fit, and they consumed diets of milk and meat. The intake of animal fat exceeds that of animal men. Measurements of the aorta showed extensive atherosclerosis with lipid infiltration and fibrous changes, but very few complicated lesions. The coronary arteries showed initial thickening by atherosclerosis, which equaled that of old U.S. men. The Maasai vessels enlarge with age to more than compensate for this disease. Why might that be? Could it have anything to do with walking 30 miles a day with their cattle? Gives them an extraordinary level of degree of fitness. Could it be that they're infested with parasites which have been shown to lower cholesterol? Nevertheless, they still have a very high rate of atherosclerosis. Their animal-based diet is clogging up their arteries. Their average lifespan in the Maasai is only 45 years. And even if you get to age 15, the average life expectancy is only 60. If that's the best you can do, the Maasai can follow a diet of drinking blood and adding it to milk. Although we've agreed, or at least I think we did, that vegetable oils are not good for people, she began to trot vegetable oils back out, comparing it to the saturated fats. I already conceded at the point of the beginning of this debate that vegetable oils are not healthy foods. They are not nutrient-dense. They are not good foods. You should not consume them. You can't use vegetable oil as a straw man diet with refined carbohydrates and sugars. Compare your diet against that and say, hey, look, the low-carb, animal-based diet is a better diet. You know what? It might be a better diet than a sugar diet that's full of oil. It's not better than a whole foods, plant-based diet. That's good.
7 minutes of rebuttal from Nina Teicholz.
Okay. So I want to finish this up a little bit, which is just to talk about that the low-carb diet now has been studied in thousands of people in dozens of clinical trials, and it shows that all those bottom lines are where people do lose more weight on those on that diet than a low-fat diet. The Swedish government did a complete review of all the clinical trial data out there in 2013, concluded that the low-carb diet was the best way for weight loss, and those trials performed better at 6 months. I put up these photos because I knew Mr. Mackey was going to have his own photos. Otherwise, I would have skipped them because they're so powerful. These are people losing weight on the low-carb diet. The guy with the pants, he did a video called "I ate butter till my pants fell off," and just to show you, everybody has these photos. This is and to the answer that the point that that you lose weight, but that you pay for it with a heart attack or a disease down the line. This is a review. 24 scientists reviewed all the literature on diabetes reversal. And then, again, these are all the clinical trials that are out there. And they came to the conclusion that dietary carbohydrate restriction was the best approach for managing diabetes because of the way that it was able to control blood glucose levels, among other things. So this is a paper that's just out. And also for heart disease, the low-carb diet reliably increases HDL, your good cholesterol. It radically decreases your triglycerides. Those are both pretty good predictors of heart attack risk. It slightly raises your LDL, your bad cholesterol. It's your bad cholesterol going up. But there has never been a study to show that lowering LDL through diet it will do anything to improve your heart attack risk. This is actually the one head-to-head diet comparison trial of the near vegan diet, the Ornish diet, and the Atkins diet. The Atkins diet, which is the high-fat diet, is that bottom, much further down line. That's a diet that much better results in terms of weight loss, and it also had better results in terms of HDL and triglycerides. So good for weight loss, and good for controlling diabetes, and good for heart disease, and this is based on clinical trial data. To the answer that, we couldn't prove smoking with the clinical trial, we never had a clinical trial on smoking, I would just say, again, that was a case where epidemiology could be used and trusted because the difference was so enormous between heavy smokers, non-smokers. There was a 35-fold difference. The kinds of epidemiological findings that we are talking about tonight are all 1.2, 1.3. Again, not the level that is even considered valid for consideration by the National Cancer Institute itself. This is, a slide. This is just, based on history. What is the history? I mean, human history is full, and I'll talk about this a little later. Of, this is like a Parthenon frieze. That cows didn't exist in the wild. We domesticated cows. We domesticated livestock. Abel was a shepherd in order to have a ready source of protein for us to eat because it's such an incredibly healthy, important food. Just responding to a few things that Mr. Mackey said about the Irish people living into their 70s. That is, at the time when that study was done, that was considered long-lived. This was, I think, in the 1950s, and now we expect to live longer. But that was considered long-lived then. The Maasai, and I want to say the reason I showed the Maasai and those other people with extreme diets is not to say I recommend this diet, I recommend that you all have blood and meat and milk. It's just simply to say this is an ugly fact that the hypothesis that a plant-based diet is better for health cannot explain. This is something that seems to bring that hypothesis down. The Maasai were actually quite sedentary. They didn't have cattle. They hunted, and they did. The young men were active and hunted. The older men sat around and didn't do much, and they didn't get heart disease either, and their cholesterol didn't go up, and their blood pressure didn't go up. And again, atherosclerosis. I mean, this is what got heart disease research off on for so many years on kind of the wrong direction because the presence of atherosclerosis in the arteries, when they looked at the arteries and they would see these lesions, and it suggested to people that eventually those lesions would build up and give people a heart attack, and that must be a sign of heart disease. But it just turns out not to be true. It's a certain kind of unstable plaque with oxidized LDL cholesterol in it that breaks away, causes a clot, and that's what causes a heart attack. So even though it's very tempting to trust your eyes and looking at that, data about arteries, it just turns out not to be true, which is why those scans they do not reliably track with heart attack risk. So I'm trying to think of if there's anything else to respond to. The point about heart disease rates going, the heart disease rates, I actually took a tremendous amount of time to research heart disease rates and look at all the data from the heart disease experts going back to the people who wrote the textbooks. And I don't know where that New England Journal of Medicine citation comes from, but but I mean in terms of the date and who did that research. But heart disease was extremely rare. It was not in any of there were textbooks on heart disease, and they talked about the presence of angina, and they diagnosed many symptoms, but they were very, very few cases of heart attacks that they can document. And there are a number of science journalists who've looked over that, and we have not been able to find any evidence of heart attacks. Very rare. It was a very rare disease. And then it really ramped up in the early, late 1920s, 1930s, and nobody really knows why. And again, the chart about meat consumption, my point about people eating 3 to 4 times more red meat, that was 150 years ago. His data starts in, I think, 1940. We do eat more meat than we did in 1940, but the historical data goes back to the 1800s, 1850s, and was documented by looking through historians who went through and looked through what slaves ate, what the wills provided for slaves, and all kinds of historical evidence and market data. I mean, actually, slaves in the 18th century ate far more red meat than we do today. I mean, people ate 3 to 4 times more red meat than we do now, and the only cooking fats were butter and lard. Before 1900, there were no vegetable oils. So everybody cooked with butter and lard. Those were the only fats available. So obviously, we ate more of those. And again, those numbers come from pre-1900 data. And it's surprisingly good data. One of the tragic things about nutrition science is it just doesn't pay any attention to the historical record of what came before the beginning of nutrition science, which started in 1950. All right.
Okay, we are now going to commence the more free-for-all part of the evening. You will be lining up at that mic, anybody who wants to ask a question of one of the debaters. Now, I mentioned that the rules, first of all, the limitations are first that there will be no questions about ethics or environmental considerations, strictly about health, no personal testimonials about your own wonderful diet. You're just an anecdote. We can't research. And then, of course, the 3 other principles involved are civility, civility, civility. John Mackey and Nina Teicholz are both very civil people, civil toward each other, and please be civil toward them when you ask a question. The only complication is that the first question has got to be for John Mackey, and then Nina Teicholz will get a chance to respond. The second question will be for Nina, and then John will get a chance to respond. So do you have a question for John?
For everybody, but
excuse me. Please address your question to John Mackey.
Yeah, I just think that it's obvious to me that the whole debate is very oversimplistic. I mean,
is the microphone on there?
Okay, I'll get close.
Please speak into the mic. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be totally oversimplistic. Obviously, we need plants and we need meat. That's what our ancestors ate for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. We can't just look at these. What we have to look more for is quality of the diet. So meat that comes from grass-fed animals is just a whole lot healthier than the meat that doesn't, or from factory farm food. Among the dairy foods that we eat, the only one that's tied to reducing the risk of diabetes is yogurt. So why do we just lump it all together with, milk is bad for you, or saturated this? No, I just want you to respond to this.
You made a statement, now ask a question.
Yeah, I think your argument is oversimplistic, and I...
Do you think your argument is oversimplistic? It sounds like you're undecided. I think the question...
I don't think it is. Next question.
Okay, excuse me. You don't think it is? Okay, but Nina, you have a chance to respond as well to the question. Is the argument oversimplistic about meat versus plants?
Well, I think it's oversimplistic to say that somebody should eat, an extreme diet, and on either side of the spectrum. And I think for most Americans, it's reasonable to say, we could go back to what we ate in the 1960s before the epidemics of obesity and diabetes, which was 40% carbs, 40% fat, 20% protein. That was pre-diabetes, pre-obesity. We're now in a stage where we have a very high carbohydrate diet because that's what the U.S. government has told us to eat. So, but there's a range of diets that people can eat and be healthy on.
You know what's an extreme diet? A diet that causes your heart to need to be cracked open, your chest cracked open so you can do heart surgery. That's an extreme diet.
Okay, next question addressed to Nina Teicholz.
To Nina. I came here to gain clarity on this issue, and I have to admit, you both make such a compelling argument that I'm more confused than ever.
You're still undecided. The man votes undecided. Go ahead.
Therefore, my question to you is, could it be something that none of us have talked about today, which could be antibiotics and pesticides and chemicals in the food supply that's leading to this massive increase in coronary heart disease and death?
I don't think we really know what causes heart disease. I don't think we, I don't think we absolutely know what causes obesity and diabetes either. But I think there's very strong clinical trial evidence, as I presented just a little bit, to show that restricting carbohydrates is the best method for reversing out of those conditions. There's a huge clinical trial base of evidence to show how effective that is. It might be that the vegan diet is also effective at that, but there's, 1 or 2 clinical trials on that. So on less than 125 people. So compared to the clinical trial data on thousands of people from all different kinds of conditions. So in terms of reversing out of those they're basically metabolic disorders. To reverse out of them, the clinical trial data is really clear where that lies.
John, comment?
Well, I don't agree with her. I don't think the clinical data supports that. She overrates a few studies that, like you take the Gardner study that she brought up, comparing the Atkins zone and Ornish and Learn diets together. The Ornish diet is a diet that's whole foods, vegetarian, plant-based diet, 10 to 12% of calories in fat, 10% in protein. But what did they test for the Ornish diet? They actually were feeding them 30% of the calories from fat, 18% in protein, and much lower level of carbohydrates. And they didn't make any distinction between whether these were whole food starch or refined carbohydrates.
I just
It
included
wasn't
that
the Ornish diet in that particular so-called controlled study. And is it really a controlled study if you can't control the food that people are actually eating? It's not. And in that particular study, both Dean Ornish and Colin Campbell wrote letters objecting that this was not really the Ornish diet. They wouldn't even publish the letters. It was a rigged study from the very beginning.
Can I respond to that?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, Gardner himself is a vegetarian, and he went into that study hoping to confirm that the vegetarian diet was the best. And I only mention that one because it's the only trial where the low-carb diet is actually compared to the near-vegan diet, and that's what we're talking about tonight. But there's the stack of clinical trials on the low-carb diet is enormous, including trials up to 2 years, which is considered the gold standard for any kind of trial to see to see if it's safe.
And there's and I don't disagree that there's studies that show the low-carb diet can reduce weight. And there are studies that show the low-carb diet compared to the straw man low-fat diet, which is not really a low-fat diet. It's still 30%. The standard American diet is 33% fat. So a low-fat diet is hardly at 30% fat. And it doesn't distinguish between whole plant foods and refined carbohydrates. And so, yeah, garbage in, garbage out. Guess what? A low-carb diet is more effective than a diet that's full of sugar. I mean, big deal. That's not proving anything.
Question for John Mackey.
Yes, thank you. My question...
Please speak in the line.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, yes.
Yes, my question is specifically about your rebuttal, Mr. Mackey. Mm-hmm. It seemed to me that you did not really address a lot of the points raised.
Didn't address what?
You did not address a lot of the points that were raised by the other side in your rebuttal. You did mention...
Which points did I not address that you'd like me to address? You gave a few anecdotal examples with photos of specific individuals, which I thought we weren't supposed to do. You I didn't show any specific
that drinking blood was not a fun thing to do and that Amish are religious people, but you didn't specifically address issues about the scientific merits of epidemiological studies versus clinical studies.
So that's your question. What are the scientific...
and you also specifically said that Ms. Teicholz used a lot of straw arguments, but for example, did you not do that when you specifically referred to processed meats in a lot of the studies that you showed where meat was viewed in a negative light, where they specifically said processed meats, which I thought we were agreeing were bad as well?
No, I don't believe Ms. Teicholz believes processed meats are bad. And she argues people should eat a lot of bacon, and so she doesn't agree with that. So I think processed meats, the evidence shows that those are more harmful than unprocessed meats. And if you're going to avoid any kind of meat, you should be avoiding those kinds of meats. So I don't know what I didn't address that you would like me to, but I'll be happy to do it now.
All right, go ahead. Your comment to the question?
There's not much for me to comment on. The data showing that processed meat causes cancer is, again, that kind of epidemiological data where it's that number, the relative risk number is less than 2, numbers like 1.3, 1.4. So I think that's very weak data. I don't think and bacon is not considered processed meat.
Sure, it's got nitrates
It's
in it.
no,
It's processed meat.
not all
I'm
bacon.
in the business,
You can
trust
have,
me, processed
yeah,
meats.
but you can have uncured bacon. It's not by definition.
not what
And
people are eating.
it's very possible that any kind of indication that you see from processed meats is by the way it was processed. So I mean, there's again another one of these confounding factors in epidemiological studies. You don't know what you're seeing when you see an effect.
Next question, a question for Nina Teicholz. Question addressed to Nina.
For John.
Well, excuse me. Then wait a second. And do you have a question for Nina Teicholz?
Yes, I do.
So please do that, and you'll get behind her. Go ahead.
Before I ask my question, I want to thank John for the wonderful food club you had that I belonged to at Whole Foods, which I did learn a lot about vegetarianism and was a vegetarian for a while.
All right, please
But I've
ask
gone
please a
back
question.
to
Ask a
I've done.
question,
My
Nina
question
Teicholz.
is, you talk about meat, and I wonder if you distinguish much between organ meats and muscle meats, and if there is a difference.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a good question. Organ meats were always preferred by all the groups that have been studied. Like, they would always, in the same way that a lion, when a lion kills, goes for the viscera, because that's where the nutrient density is. I mean, that chart I showed about nutrient density, I mean, beef liver is one of the most nutrient-dense, folate, selenium, iron, zinc. There's a tremendous amount of nutrients. You can't get those nutrients in plant foods. But yes, so the organ meats were always preferred. And they're extremely nutrient dense. Now we think that we only eat the muscle meats. We stopped eating the organ meats because of their cholesterol content. In the recent dietary guidelines, we backed out of those cholesterol caps. So we can now eat organ meats again. But we've long believed that they're unhealthy because of their cholesterol content. But actually, they're incredibly nutrient dense. And if you remember, cod liver oil is what people used to feed their children to prevent them from getting sick. And that's because of the nutrient density.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
comment.
I mean, it's a good opportunity for me to talk about nutrient density. The slide she showed, they're showing nutrient density not on a per calorie basis, but on a per gram basis. And that's the difference. That's why those slides don't. Mine are based on nutrient density on a per calorie basis.
It doesn't make a difference.
It does make a
shouldn't. The
difference because
calories
we can
don't make
only
a
eat so many
difference.
calories in a day. And if you say you can eat 2,000 calories, if you're eating 2,000 calories of whole plant foods, you're getting an extraordinary amount of nutrient density. If you eat 2,000 calories of animal foods, you're getting a low level of nutrient density.
But can I just respond to that, because that the chart that you showed didn't have any numbers in it, so it's hard for me to judge. Didn't list any nutrients, and so I couldn't actually see. And I went online to try to find.
I have the
couldn't find
nutrients here
any.
if you'd like to know what they are.
Afterward, but I looked at all the ones from Joel Fuhrman, and I saw that. I mean, that chart was from his book, and I think that it's. But calories. When you look at diet trials, if you're on a lower carb diet, you eat as many calories as you want. Calories really are. It's the idea that it's calories in, calories out is an idea that's kind of on its way out, because it turns out that people metabolize fat and protein calories very differently than they do carbohydrate calories.
I mean, did you see the chart I showed? Calorie consumption's up 25%. Obesity is up. Fat is up 20%. Calories do matter. Eat more calories, you gain weight. And so she says calories don't matter. It's nonsense.
Can I respond to that?
Good.
Calories going up is an association with obesity, and the question is it causation? One of the ideas about why are people eating so many more calories? You have to answer that. What caused Americans to suddenly become so gluttonous?
They got wealthier.
And lazy. But people eat till they're hungry, and one of the things that one idea is that it's all the sugar and processed foods, and we get more calories. That's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is that when you take animal foods off the plate, those foods are uniquely satiating. Protein and fat fill you up. If you have a lunch of beef stew, you are not reaching for a snack at 4 o'clock. You are full. And our kids are now hungry because they don't eat satiating foods anymore. And so when you're hungry, you reach for snack foods. You reach carbohydrates because they're quick and easy, accessible glucose calories.
Again, I want to repeat.
That's just an idea, by the way.
We're not talking about this debate is not about simple carbohydrates. It's not about sugar. It's not about white flour. It's not about those foods she's talking about, because the debate's not about that. That's been eliminated from the debate.
I'm just talking about why we increased. I'm just talking about a hypothesis about why we increased our calories over the last 30 years. Why do we do that? You have to explain that. It's not that we're worse people, or that we're more gluttonous, or that we're lazier.
We increased our fat consumption 20% as well.
No, we didn't.
Yes, we did. We
Well,
increased our fat.
you know what,
Show me the United
I've-
States Department of
I
Agriculture.
just consulted on a paper that's coming out in Nutrition with the authors who reviewed all the NHANES. That's the best possible data that we have in terms of consumption going back to 1965. It's the best paper on that data so far. Fat calories since 1965 have gone up by close to 30%. And since 1970, they've gone up by 5%. Carbohydrates have gone up by over 25% since 1965. So that data, that's the best state-of-the-art data. That study is just being published now. So I think that that's not true. I mean, and I think it's not fair to blame Americans for being lazy and somehow gluttonous. I mean, we're not so different than our grandparents. Why are we eating more calories? You have to explain that. There's some kind of mechanism. People are not, you cannot blame the American people themselves.
Well, we should go to a question. Question for John Mackey.
You guys kind of touched upon this, but this is for both of you if you want to answer it. But for John, you mentioned you had a study where your employees lost weight and went through a vegan diet. Can you guys actually talk a little bit more about the psychological aspect of going vegan? So let's say, a person who ate everything today just decided to go vegan for the next month or so. Psychologically, how can you talk about how that works? Not eating meat anymore, not eating ice cream, not eating chocolate,
Well, the first thing, of course, is I'm not arguing for a 100% vegan diet here today. It's a 90% plus. Could go all the way up to 100%. It's true, I am a vegan myself, have been for almost 12 years. But that's not what this debate is about. It's about in whole foods, 90+% plant-based diet. So here's one thing I've learned that kind of answers your question. It's not easy for people to change their diets. I mean, we know people get addicted to cigarettes. They can become alcoholics. But most people don't admit that they're simply addicted to their food choices. We get addicted to calorie-dense foods. We get addicted to sugar. We get addicted to white flour. We get addicted to meat. We get addicted to olive oil. These foods are very calorie-dense, and we like them. And when we can get them, we eat them. And that's the essence of our problem. I'm not blaming Americans. I'm blaming the fact that we genetically evolved to crave calorie-dense foods because they were relatively rare. But what I've learned is that you can evolve your palate. I think I eat an extremely healthy diet, and I love it because I have retaught my palate, whatever food you eat, you will come to love. So you might as well learn to love the foods that are most healthy for you, that are most nutrient-dense, that will most sustain your life. And it takes a little while, but I mean, I didn't like to eat vegetables when I was younger. I grew up eating the junk food diet of America, but I've taught myself to love all vegetables now. They're delicious foods. It just took me a little while to re-educate my palate.
Dina, do you want to comment on the question?
I can't really speak to that, but I would say the only data that I'm aware of in terms of addiction is that there's clearly data on the addictiveness of sugar. There's no, that I'm aware of, any data on the addictiveness of any other kind of food. I don't really have much to say about it.
Okay, next question. Question for Nina.
Nina, I spend a lot of time traveling outside of the cozy intellectual confines of the Upper West Side of New York City or Austin, Texas. And when you go to Erie, Pennsylvania, and the subject of nutrition comes up, everybody says the same thing, which is they keep on changing their minds. So now, and they as nutritionists, I guess, so now I just eat whatever I want to eat because I don't really know anymore. And they say this as they're driving through the takeout window at Jack in the Box. So my question is, what needs to change in this science of nutrition so that there's consistent results and Americans can, lose their cynicism over this?
Well, one of the reasons there's so many flip-flopping headlines, which of course drive everybody crazy, is precisely those epidemiological studies that I was talking about, which is that every time, those are huge databases, you can just turn out millions of associations, and every time that one comes out, they send it through the university press office, and that becomes a headline. And then when it's finally tested in a clinical trial and reversed, that's one of the reasons that we have so many flip-flopping headlines. That's one source of flip-flopping headlines. Right now, you have another source of contention, which is that the past 65 years of nutrition history, we've been from the beginning of our saturated fat, our hypothesis that saturated fat cause it and cholesterol cause heart disease. That's been our dietary guide, our official policy since pretty much 1961. The US government got involved in 1980. So, and now we're discovering that that was based on very soft science, so we're reversing out of some of that. And there's a little bit of a kind of war going on now, because there's a body of researchers and scientists who have come to believe that this low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet that's been our official policy since 1980, that's wrong. That carbohydrates are uniquely fattening in some way, and there's been a tremendous amount of clinical trial research that's been done in the last decade. And they are kind of an insurgency, and that's why you see these back and forth papers happening now. There's kind of a tremendous war going on now. And it's basically, that's why. There's been this growing insurgency of the last 10 years, new scientific research, and there's kind of an old guard in the dietary guidelines, American Heart Association, defending themselves as strongly as they can. This is not really on topic with what you're saying, but because you're not advocating that. But anyway, so that's my perception of why we have these diet debates going on now.
John, yeah.
I have it, follow the money. Follow the money. Think about the industries that are threatened. I mean, the dairy industry, the meat industry. Do you think these guys want to lose their market share? There's a lot of dairy money, a lot of meat money, a lot of the Atkins Foundation money shows up in these studies. If you go back and you look and you find somebody like Ronald Krauss, you find out the guy's getting paid off by the dairy industry, the Cattlemen's Association, and the Atkins Foundation. Follow the money. If you want to know why, it's very much in the interest of those interests to confuse people. So they'll just throw up their hands and say, yeah, I want to eat. I just eat. I can't figure it out. It's too confusing. I'll just eat what I want to eat.
Neither of you guys really.
That's the tobacco. The tobacco industry did that exact same thing.
Neither of you guys really answered my question. My question was,
I was trying to respond to hers.
How does the science have to? How does the field have to change?
Well, yeah, Nina, try to answer the question. You've got a comment.
I just want to respond to the follow the money debate. I mean, one of the ways in which this has been a kind of like a rhetorical device since the 1970s, which is like, let's blame the meat and the dairy industries for warping the science, the big bad meat industry. And I just want to say, one of the things I do in my book is I went back and followed the money. And I can tell you, the most influential group of companies in nutrition science is the vegetable oil companies. The ADM, Cargill, Monsanto, Unilever, and they are far more clever than the meat and dairy industries, who frankly are pathetic in the way that they go about because the vegetable oil companies are funneling their money through the USDA. They wash their money. They get into nutrition science at the very source. They were funding Harvard and to endow professor chairs back in the 1940s. They have been in on this. Standard Food, Best Food, all those companies, all makers of carbohydrates, and they have very cleverly been in on this. They knew that nutrition scientists were the ones to influence, and they have been doing it since the 1940s. And they're by far more powerful than the meat and dairy industries, which if you just want to look at our nutrition policy, you can see how badly they've lost and how pathetic they are as lobbyists.
Next question for John Mackey.
Yeah, sure. So my question is, John, whether you believe that a plant-based diet improves quality of life or just quantity of life. I note that a lot of the presentation was focused on mortality and heart rate incidence, and in particular, a response to Nina's point about potentially a correlation with depression and suicide, and whether or not there's been any studies on the relationship to testosterone levels and serotonin, dopamine, and other things that relate to mood or it seems like there might be a trade-off here between longevity and quality of life, and I'm curious as to whether or not
I mean, obviously I disagree. I mean, if you're reversing heart disease, if you're reversing diabetes, your quality of life is going up. You're more alive, you're more vital. So, I mean, I don't know how to answer that. Quality of life is subjective, ultimately. I think most people want it. We want to live a long time, and we don't want to have a bunch of diseases. We don't want to be decrepit. That's not what everybody wants, and so the quality of life is kind of up to each individual to make for themselves. This diet will give you a larger quantity of life, and what you do with the extra years is up to you.
Your comment, Nina?
You know, I think that it's possible that the vegan diet improves quality or quantity of life, but there's just no data. There's no solid data to show that it can do there's just no data
If
to
we
really
only
talk
could
about that.
lock a bunch of vegans away for like 20 years and feed them and study them, we'd have a controlled study, but we can't do that.
But there have
We're going
been
to have to
clinical
use
trials,
observational
but there's
studies.
many,
we can't track the long-term.
There have been many
studies.
clinical trials, up to 2 years, and they do that. They
2
do
years is nothing.
They do it, but it's more than the vegan diet has. The vegan diet has those 2 clinical trials, one being multifactorial, on 125 people. So, and there have been long-term trials. They do them in company cafeterias. It's not impossible to do. It just hasn't, and maybe they would work for the vegan diet. They just haven't been done.
Unfortunately, the plant-based diet doesn't have rich sugar daddies funding the studies, whether they be meat, dairy, oil companies, or processed food companies. Nobody wants to fund the whole foods plant-based diet because it's not anybody's interest for everybody to get healthy, and there's no particular interest that's going to make a lot of money out of it.
Well, I mean, Whole Foods could fund one. I mean, if you,
we are funding them. We are.
Well, that's
Whole
good.
Foods is giving quite a bit of money to
Anybody
this.
who applauded will be removed from the hall. We don't want any raucousness, please. Okay, question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I lost track. The question would
me, I
be
think.
for John.
I think it is.
To both of them. 2 things. First of all, the Mediterranean diet, namely the diet, and specifically the one from the island of Crete, where actually I proudly hail from, is considered to be the healthiest diet, on the planet. So, can you both of you comment on what is the content and the balance between the vegan, vegetarian, or meat-eating portion in the Mediterranean diet? That's number 1. Number 2, it's been said many times that we evolved to be the human beings that we are because we switched from like eating roots to being hunters and then eating meat. So have any studies been done as to what is the effect of the diet, vegan versus like meat eating, to the development of the brain?
John, do you take that first?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Nina's the study, she's a study whiz.
Well, I mean, there's been, if you add developmental anthropologists and evolutionary biologists pretty much agree that humans evolved eating meat. I mean, there's just, if you look at the structure of the teeth, if you look at our intestinal tract, if you, any aspect of human biology, I mean, there's a number of books about this. And then actually, there's an interesting book called Catching Fire by I think it's a Harvard anthropologist who wrote that it was really the cooking of meat that made the nutrients exceptionally dense, and that's what allowed us to have big brains and evolve. And it's kind of just considered a fact that we evolved eating meat, and that's what we evolved to eat. And by contrast, chimpanzees, which is our nearest primate cousin, who are mainly vegetarians, they have huge mouths and huge amount of teeth, and they have to spend all day long getting all the nutrients. They eat all day long. I mean, one of the great things about being human is that if you eat meat, which is far more efficient, you have time to do other things with your day. Like you can go build the Taj Mahal or whatever. I mean, you don't have to eat all day long to get the nutrients that you need. So what was your other question about the Mediterranean diet? So there's actually a whole chapter in my book on the Mediterranean diet. I think that I probably know more about that than anybody on the planet. And it turned out to be a healthier diet because it was compared to the low-fat diet. The low-fat diet is a failed diet. And it turned out that we just have studied the Mediterranean diet to death because scientists love to go to conferences all over the Mediterranean diet, all over the Mediterranean, and I document those conferences and where they went and and all the olive oil that was passed out and all their lovely fruit baskets and everything. And then, but there were other people who were long-lived who ate diets, in Siberia, but there are no scientists who want to go to Siberia and study Siberia. So that's why we have the Mediterranean diet.
What's the meat content of the Mediterranean diet?
The meat, okay, here's a very interesting story for you. So meat, they didn't eat chicken or, the Mediterranean diet, the way it's been translated for Americans is you should eat chicken and hardly any meat. It's actually in the tiny top tip above sweets. The Harvard University Mediterranean diet pyramid tells you to eat less meat than even sugar. But if you go to the Mediterranean, anybody who's been to the Mediterranean knows, you eat lamb, you eat, that's what they ate in the Mediterranean diet. But because and this is a whole other subject, because there's so much bias against saturated fat for 50 years, when they translated that diet for Americans, they're like, we can't recommend lamb and beef, so we're going to translate that into chicken for Americans.
So it's an American Mediterranean diet.
Yeah. Next question, yeah.
Yes, I wanted to discuss the dismissal of all epidemiologic studies, which was very distorted. The World Cancer Research Institute just reviewed about 1,000 different epidemiologic studies and recommended that the that we eat a diet with high in plant foods and reduce animal products, reduce colon cancer and breast cancer. All these thousands of scientists are not bought up by the industry or are stupid. They're not stupid people. They control in epidemiologic studies. They control for exercise. They control for people who have better habits. Like you distorted the Seventh-day Adventist study. I just want to ask you the question. So here's the question. Did you read the study and recognize that they controlled for people who exercised, whether they ate meat, whether they didn't eat meat, whether they were overweight, how much meat they ate, whether they ate nuts, whether they didn't eat nuts? In other words, the Seventh-day Adventist trial controlled, and most of these epidemiologic studies controlled for the variables that you're claiming they did not control for. And among the Adventists who all did not smoke and drink alcohol, they controlled for those who were vegans, those who ate some meat, those who ate more meat. So I want to know, did you actually look at that study, or were you just falsifying were you just giving false data to this audience? Or did you really read that study?
Yeah. I go into that study in great detail in my book. I looked at all the publications that came out of it, and I don't know if I remember all the details now. In one case, they used a control group that was across the country and the East Coast. So, on the East Coast, the general heart disease rates are higher, so it wasn't the Seventh-day Adventist.
The Seventh-day Adventist study had their own controls. They were all comparing Adventists to Adventists.
In some cases, but not in all cases. And then there was the advantages that were seen for the Seventh-day Adventists were for men, but not for women in many cases. I think it was almost entirely advantages seen for men. And then the other thing is that the people who most closely adhere to the vegan diet or the vegetarian diet for Adventists are people who generally adhere to the church. So they do other things. Maybe they go to services more.
No,
maybe
they were comparing people who all went to church. In other words,
no,
they were comparing Adventists to Adventists.
But they're greater adherers.
And those who were vegans.
They compared the greater adherers and the less greater adherers, and they found that the greater adherers had better results. And so what I'm saying is, to be a healthy adherer, the adherence effect is actually an effect in science. If you're they're called a healthy adherer. If you're an adherer, you're the kind of person who follows advice regularly, and it's a big effect. It affects your health. You're the kind of person who goes to your doctor. You're the kind of person who takes your pills. You're the kind of person who does the things you're supposed to do in life, and those people all look healthier. Always. So that's a confounding variable.
When you say those confounding variables,
when you say
and they found that the Seventh-day Adventist vegan group lived the men lived 14 years longer than California
Let me tell you,
That's 14 years.
You cannot control, when they say they can control for it, let's say they say they can control for exercise. They say they can control for exercise. Nobody knows how exercise affects heart disease. How can they control for exercise? How can they control for nuts? How can they control for the things they haven't even thought to measure?
Your clinical studies don't control everything either.
Clinical trials are by definition
You have 1,000 epidemiologic studies that all show the same thing.
They don't even control the food.
They all didn't. Every epidemiologic study in the world didn't blow it. All these hundreds of thousands of nutritional researchers, they control for as many variables as possible. They're not all wrong.
They were wrong about hormone therapy.
Every
they were
epidemiologic
wrong about
study.
Dietary cholesterol. Now we're witnessing. Let's look at how our
saying
experts.
Out of 1,000 epidemiologic studies, they're all wrong. All the researchers are wrong, even though they control.
Jimmy, you asked your question. You ask your question, let her answer, and then let John comment.
I mean, the argument that experts just can't be wrong is contradicted by a number of things we see reversed by experts who all thought they were right. Hormone replacement therapy, vitamin E supplementation, dietary cholesterol, saturated fat, linchpins of our dietary advice for the past 60 years. Those experts were wrong. Everybody was on board with that. NIH, AHA, every medical society in the world. And they were wrong. So that's just evidence that people can be wrong. They just can be.
It's not even related to the question.
Okay, Jimmy. Now, Jimmy, forgive me. You asked your question. John, do you have a comment? And then we ought to go.
I mean, one of my frustrations in reading your book was that you cherry pick. You cherry pick the studies. You use observational studies when it serves your interest. You use clinical studies that I think are the money is there from vested interest, and they are not well controlled. They don't actually compare against a true low-fat diet. A 30% fat diet is not a low-fat diet. I feel like you're rigging the game, and you're not a dispassionate scientist, that you are attempting to confuse people. That's my basic conclusion after reading the book. People are going to be confused about this, and it's going to do great harm to people because they're going to continue to eat.
Okay, that sounds like a summation, but you want to respond to that briefly, Nina?
Well, first of all, the 30% fat diet is the standard diet as defined by the American Heart Association, the USDA. It's not my definition. Secondly, I use observational studies to disprove hypotheses, not to as evidence of proof. So in observational data, if you see that people who have breast cancer, their risk goes down as they increase their saturated fat consumption, then it's a piece of evidence to show that saturated fats don't cause breast cancer. But I would never use, I do not at any point use observational data as proof of a hypothesis. I think the point about cherry picking is also one that comes up a lot with, this is an important point to make. I'm not proposing a hypothesis. Cherry picking is a kind of accusation you make when somebody's proposing a hypothesis. You need a bunch of evidence for your hypothesis. You select, and this is what happens. It's called selection bias. You select certain things and you ignore other things. And if you're proposing a hypothesis, you're open to the critique of cherry picking. I'm not proposing a hypothesis. My book is devoted to defeating a hypothesis, critiquing the existing hypothesis that saturated fats and cholesterol and fat in general causes disease. And I critique that hypothesis. I don't know what causes heart disease and obesity and diabetes. I suggest that carbohydrates might play a role, and I present some ideas about that. It might be vegetable oils. I present a lot of data about that. But I am not proposing a hypothesis. The main aim of my book is just to say that this hypothesis has been mistaken, and we need to back out of it.
Sounds like a summation. One final question, then we're going to go to the summations from the both sides. One question.
Okay, I've done a little homework on this myself, and I'm addressing.
Aren't we going to ask questions to each other?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm addressing my question to Mr. Mackey. People studying malnutrition in Africa obviously have a vested interest in solving this problem. They are not really financed by anybody, or they could solve the problem. The research I've read finds quite clearly in a clinical basis that people who eat a near vegan diet in Africa are malnourished. That is the definition of malnourishment in Africa. The cure for that is to feed them milk and meat. That resolves the malnutrition caused by a vegan diet in poor African children. If a vegan diet leads to malnutrition in growing children and meat is the cure, how can we say that a meat-based diet is harmful?
Well, because it depends upon what they were eating. I mean,
vegetables.
Well, vegetables themselves are not a sufficient a source for food. I've argued for a whole foods, 90% plant-based diet based on starches, based on vegetables, based on fruits, based on nuts and seeds, based on beans.
Right, but what cures the malnutrition is meat.
Depends on what they're malnourished from.
A vegetarian diet.
We're in a circular argument. Because
okay.
It's not the vegetarian diet that's causing them to be malnourished. I'm on a vegan diet. I'm not malnourished. There are many vegans here that are not malnourished. So what were those Africans eating that caused them to be malnourished? Not that they were eating a vegetarian diet. They were eating the wrong kind.
Why is meat the cure?
They were eating the wrong kind of vegetarian diet.
Vic, I'm afraid I'm not going to have time for your question.
And thank you both tonight. It was very educational.
Yes, you'll have time to respond to that. Vic, I'm afraid we don't have time for your question.
I want to respond to that.
Excuse me, Vic. Actually, I'm sorry, Vic. No, I'm going to forgive that. But
can I just respond to that? Because it's a really important point, which is that before nutrition science became focused on how to try to prevent heart disease, it was solely focused on the two fundamental questions for sustaining life, which was how do human beings grow and reproduce? And that was nutrition science back in the 1920s and 30s. They did a lot of studies to look at that. And they on the omnivore animal like humans. And they found that what could reliably reverse growth faltering was, and they said that these are the foods that were called protective foods: milk, butter, eggs, organ meats, green leafy vegetables. They found that vegetarian animals that they could survive, but it was much harder they had to use just the right balance of seeds, nuts, legumes. It was much harder to achieve that perfect balance, whereas giving omnivore animals those protective animal foods was just a much easier way to sustain life.
Thank you. Vic, yours is the final question, and then we're going to revert to the questions. Ask your question, Vic.
Well, I'm one of those statisticians who your armchair speculations are devoted to debunking. And I would point out that...
This is addressed to Nina, I guess, yeah.
Well,
Gotcha.
Yes, it is. I'd point out that there have been numerous studies that show that a vegetarian diet increases life expectancy. Now, you speak about the minuscule numbers in the results, but I would point out that all of these studies are very peer-reviewed. Before they get into the journals, they generally have 15 to 20 authors and 5 or 6 statisticians that review them. And the major kind of study that they use is what they call the Cox hazard rate model. And in a typical study, they report a hazard rate that is twice as great for the people on the high meat diet versus the vegetarian diet. The differences that you talk about as being 1% and 2% are completely overshadowed by the results, for example, in the study, does low meat consumption increase life expectancy in humans?
Please speak in the mic.
Which is a meta-study that examined 5 different studies involving millions of people, and they conclude that the differences in life expectancy in general for the 2 groups are about 5 years. Now, this is a very important difference. It's not the insignificant difference that you talk about. And every one of these studies is controlled for all the factors that they can. They're not accepted in the journals unless they take account of differences in lifestyle and weight and exercise, smoking habits. In the Seventh-day Adventist study that you talk about, they not only compared the results of Seventh-day Adventists to groups in the same state, but they compared the Seventh-day Adventists who were low-meat eaters to no-meat eaters, and they found, again, a 5-year difference in the Seventh-day Adventists between those who were the complete vegetarians versus the non-complete vegetarians. In general,
well,
I'm saying
I think, excuse me, I think your question is quite clear.
I'll just respond to a few of those points.
It's a good statement, Vic.
I'm saying that debunking a study and saying that
your question is clear. Your question is clear to Nina.
I think that the field of epidemiology is, there is a tremendous amount of debate over it. In what way it should be used. I put up the data. There's Stanford professor John Ioannidis, who's trying to show that there's a failure to be able to replicate epidemiological findings. The fact that they're peer-reviewed, that's a whole other subject. There's a lot of stuff that gets in the scientific literature that should not be there, and the peer review process is a little bit broken. The largest ever epidemiological study that actually looked at vegetarians, had a vegetarian cohort, was in Europe as an EPIC study. They had tens of thousands of vegetarians, and they found that there was no increased life expectancy in that group.
Is there any epidemiological study that would convince you that a vegetarian diet is better than a meat diet? Is there any sort of evidence that you would agree to is conclusive, or will you come up with an armchair objection to any such study as you do?
I think epidemiological studies are problematic. I just think they are because of the confounding issues that you cannot measure.
So that every study, almost every study in the Journal of American JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine, you're saying is fallacious because almost all of them are epidemiological studies.
Our diet, our advice to restrict
That the whole field is basically, is.
Yeah, well, that's what she said. Go ahead, yes. Yeah, you said that.
You know, the advice to eat a low-fat diet, which we're now reversing out of, the advice to avoid dietary cholesterol, based on epidemiological evidence, hormone replacement therapy, vitamin E. I mean, there's a long list of the ways that epidemiology has gone wrong. So there's clearly questions about what this data can say.
Nina, you
as a matter of the way...
You can come up with an objection to every study.
That's what a debate is.
Right.
A debate is arguing your point of view. I want to say one more thing about the Seventh-day Adventist study. That is run out of La Loma University, which is a university for Seventh-day Adventists. So they have every bias to try to show that their lifestyle is healthy. So, you know, I mean, there's just... if that's why it took me 9 years to write my book. I went in and looked at every single piece of scientific literature. I really understood the rigors of this field, the nature of the data, and it takes a long time to really master it. And, you know, epidemiology is a central point.
Do you feel you're competent to object to all the statistical evidence that has been provided and all the experts who have signed their names to the papers and all the peer reviews? Do you feel that you're...
You look at the reversals.
That you're hypothetical.
Look at the reversals themselves.
And talking about various studies that don't prove it, that somehow this overcomes...
You know, I'm not here to debate. I'm not here to debate you. I'm here to debate John Mackey.
Okay,
so,
okay, John, make your comments.
Well, I'm your host and I'm paying you, so you should be...
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, just hold. Money is not convincing. John, make your comments. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I think Vic raises a very important point, which is, where are your observational studies, your epidemiological studies that show low-carb, meat-based diets lead to longer lifespan? Where are that? I put up a whole bunch of them. You just said, oh, well, those aren't controlled studies. Where are yours that contradict it? Where are the observational studies that show a low-carb, meat-based diet leads to longer life? Just show me one.
You know, first of all, I don't believe in epidemiological studies. That's why I presented the far more rigorous base of clinical trial data that I think is what establishes proof. And you know, there is no data on low-carb dieters because people haven't been following a low-carb diet for very long, and they don't measure for it. They don't ask that question. That's not part of their question. Whatever data they have now, they've approximated from the questions that they do ask, which is just another one of the measurement problems of these studies.
Okay, we're now going to refer to questions. You've asked Nina a question. Nina, you have 5 minutes to ask John some questions, and let's go.
Are we going to alternate, or is she going to ask me a bunch of questions?
Would you prefer it all night?
I can do it either way.
Okay, well, let's 5 minutes, just 5 minutes for Nina. Go ahead, yes. Let's time, 5 minutes, go ahead. Nina.
All right, you know, my question really has to do with the point that was brought up earlier about children, which is that, and again, going back to the 1920s and 30s, where nutrition scientists were asking the question of, the basic questions of survival for any species. How do you grow and reproduce successfully? And they, back then, when they were looking at rats and pigs, found that vegetarian animals grew half as large, lived half as long, and had more trouble reproducing and rearing their young. So I'm wondering how you feel comfortable recommending a vegan diet for children when there's no data on them, and when they may have different distinct nutritional needs.
Okay. That's your question to me?
Yes.
Because a vegan diet can be, and is, the most nutrient-dense diet you can eat if it's a whole foods plant-based diet. Of course I recommend that for children. And I know hundreds of vegan children that are flourishing and are growing normally, and that's a myth. It's just simply not true. But you have to eat an intelligent vegan diet. And by the way, once again, I'm not arguing for a 100% vegan diet here. You can have up to 10% of your calories come from animal foods. So it's a whole foods, 90+% plant-based diet. That's our debate topic. And children flourish under that particular diet. I've seen it over and over and over again.
Okay, but that's your anecdotal observation. So what you need in order to recommend something to people, and this is, at the center of what you're doing, which is to say, I believe my eyes, I believe what I see, I believe in my clinics. You don't see in your clinics the people who drop out. That's why you have, rigorous trials. In order to, you only see the success stories. You don't see the people who aren't succeeding, and you don't have any trial, anything for children. I mean, actually, the trial data on children.
I thought she was asking me questions, and I was answering them.
But I'm concerned about.
I'm trying to give. You're doing all the talking.
Okay, but I'm concerned about, how do you feel comfortable recommending a diet for children when there's no data on them, and they do have different nutritional needs. They are, and so I'm wondering how that is, how you feel comfortable doing that.
And I've told you I feel very comfortable, because do you have any clinical studies that indicate children do not do well under a whole foods, plant-based diet?
I have clinical trial data on children showing that when you restrict animal foods, they inevitably suffer nutritional deficiencies. There's plenty of data on that. And that actually, again, the foods that would reliably reverse growth retardation in children are meat, butter, and milk. Reliably. You just give them those foods. You don't have to do some balancing act of particular legumes and beans and nuts and seeds.
Most of the planet doesn't eat dairy products. Only a small percentage of this world eats dairy products. And funny thing, those children seem to grow up just fine, not eating butter, milk, and cheese. I mean, most of the planet's allergic to dairy products. They can't even digest them. They don't have the enzymes to digest them. Almost the entire Asian population grew up not eating dairy products, and they have flourished eating a basically mostly plant-based diet. They're thin, and Japan has the longest life of any country any large country in the world, and they're mostly eating plant-based diets with some sushi.
Japan has the highest rates of stroke in the world.
They eat a very high salt in their diet.
That may be it, or it may be cholesterol
But they also
depletion.
live longer than Americans do.
Americans live longer, as you said. Might be our junk food, might be our high sugar rate. I mean, the Okinawans were very long lived.
Look,
all those people ate very little sugar.
I gave a great answer to your
sugar.
question, which is there's many nations on this planet that don't eat any dairy products, and their children are extremely healthy. You don't need dairy products to be healthy.
Maybe they eat eggs. Maybe they eat meat. I mean, those are the foods that are the most nutrient dense. You don't have to.
I'm not arguing that human beings are and should be vegans. There's ethical arguments to be that, but I can't make those tonight. Yeah. There's environmental arguments I can make, but I can't make those tonight. So it's a 90+% plant-based diet, and there is tremendous evidence that diet leads to flourishing health and longevity, and it does for children as well. What's your next question?
I think we're out of time on that.
45 seconds still left.
Okay, yeah, not enough time.
That's okay.
Okay, all right, John, you asked 5 minutes for you to ask questions.
Sure. Animal consumption is exploding around the world. You really believe that the radical increase in the consumption of animals in the United States and around the world has nothing to do with the rapid increase in obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer? Do you really believe it's just about the sugar and the refined carbs?
So right before I came, I looked up the USDA dietary survey. So from 1970 to 2005, this is availability data. So it has to be adjusted for loss, which they tried to do. From 1970 to 2005, milk is down by 30%. Red meat is down by 17%. If there's been an increase in meat consumption, it's all from chicken. Chicken has gone up by like 1,000-fold. Eggs have been down from 1970 to 17%. What we've seen from 1970 to 2005 is increased consumption of grains by 40%, including a 20% increase in whole wheat flour. Vegetables since 1970 are up by 23%. There's been nearly a 2,000% increase in lettuce, 450% increase in broccoli, 425% increase in leafy greens. Fruit is up by 13%. Nuts were up by 27%. So cheese consumption has gone up a little bit. Red meat, the number that you picked from 1940, there was an all-time low of red meat consumption from 1920 to 1940 largely because of Upton Sinclair's book. So all this is just from a USDA research paper. It obviously contradicts your information, but I don't know what your data comes from.
It comes from the United States Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service. Here it is. 1970, 1990, and 2010, you can see calories are up 25%. You can see added sugars are up 10%. You can see added fats and oils are up 62%.
Added fats and oils are vegetable oils.
Yes,
and
added fats and oils.
That's all vegetable oils.
Yes, I understand.
Right, that's not animal fats.
You can see that meat, eggs, and nuts are up 3%. You can see vegetables are down 3%. You can see fruits are up 25%. The data's all right there.
Right. Okay. So
eggs,
the eggs, meat, and nuts category. What's driving that number going up is the nuts. Nuts have been up by quite a lot. Eggs have been down, as I said, and they lump them together And so that, but it's better to have the individual numbers. So eggs are down by 17%. And again, chicken, because of the rapid increase in chicken, it looks like meat is going up, but red meat has gone way down. So yes, I do not think that those...
Red meat has not gone down. I showed a
decline,
slide. Red meat's up 70% since...
that was an all-time low in America of red meat eating. So yes, I think, especially the numbers that are the most relevant are since 1970.
Meat consumption for the past 100 years. Here we go. It's all right here. So yes, chicken's up considerably. Look at beef in 1910, and it's up, about 40%. Yes, it has declined since 1970. I don't deny that. I'm saying it's way up since 1900. Meat consumption overall includes poultry, and that is up 70%. I concede the point that red meat consumption is down since 1970, but overall meat consumption is up. Overall meat consumption is up.
Maybe we should eat more nutrient-dense beef. Chicken is far less nutrient-dense. But anyway, I think, and you can see the line for beef is starting to go down as of 1910. But in
Thank
general,
God. People are waking up.
Saturated fat overall, which is a pretty good indicator for animal foods, has gone down by 11% since 1970. And I think the numbers that are most relevant are the ones since 1970 because that's when obesity and diabetes took off. That's been the huge over 25% increase in carbohydrates. We've seen animal foods on the whole, as measured by saturated fat, going down. And we see the individual animal foods going down.
Some of them are going down and some are going up.
Well, milk's down, red meat's down, eggs are down. So what's gone up a little bit, somewhat is cheese. And fruits and vegetables have gone up. So, the idea that we should eat more fruits and vegetables is,
Dairy and dairy fats have gone up like 17 or 18%. Look at dairy. It was 247 calories per day in 1970, and there it's 274. I'm pretty good at math, and that's not going down. That's going up.
So non-fat dairy has gone up a tremendous amount. And actually, some of the data, we've a dramatic increase in low-fat milk, low-fat dairy, and I think that, there's some, that it may be driving unhealthy outcomes.
Dairy fats, they've gone up over 300% in the last 40 years. Dairy fats, see that little slither up there? So glad I brought this data.
Anyway, in terms of that, Nina, you have 7 minutes for your negative summary. So if you want to pick up that point, go ahead. You want to go to the dash? We're in the home stretch. Negatives, the summary for the negative, followed by the summary for the affirmative. Hang on. 7 minutes for you, Nina, to do your negative summary.
Okay.
You going to do it from there? Or?
Oh, yeah, I can go up here.
Whichever you want. Up to you.
All right, so my job tonight was to show, just merely to show in this debate that a low-carb diet with animal foods is as healthy as a vegan diet. I think I've done that. But I think I also earned my bonus points by showing some worrisome health effects of a vegan diet. The issues of nutritional deficiencies. I don't know if I mentioned this, but vegan diets, there's no B12 at all in plant foods. The nutritional concerns for pregnant women and children, problems of basic healthy growth for children, the fact that those clinical trials that are based on high plant fats, plant-based diets, had higher rates of cancer, cerebral hemorrhages, and deaths from suicide, and accidental and violent deaths, depression and mental health being issues that happen when you associated with a diet that's higher in plant-based fats and possibly cholesterol depletion. And one of the central problems at a vegan diet is always higher in carbohydrates. It's very hard to eat a plant-based diet without being that's almost always a high-carb diet. And the problem of high carbohydrate diets, because carbohydrates trigger the release of insulin in your bloodstream, and that insulin being kind of the king of all hormones for making you fat. So it's very hard, and clinical trials, again, show that it is almost impossible to control weight and and diabetes and heart disease on a high carbohydrate diet. They're the biggest ever clinical trial nutrition study ever done, was on 50,000 women, all on a high carb diet. And there was no positive effect on weight or any other kind of disease. So that's a problem with the vegan diet, which isn't to say that there aren't, people can flourish on all kinds of diets. There's definitely a portion of people who thrive and benefit from or can be healthy on a high carbohydrate diet. But the overwhelming amount of clinical trial data really shows that restricting carbs for the great majority of people produces better outcomes in terms of controlling their weight, in terms of diabetes, and in terms of reducing the heart disease biomarkers that are most predictive of heart attack risk. So, and again, I mean, you know, tonight, a lot about tonight has been a discussion about the quality of the data. I mean, a vegan diet could be healthy, but there's just simply no good, rigorous trial data to show that that diet is, it's just not there. So, and there's no historical record of humans surviving on that diet, on a 10%, a 90% plant-based diet. There's no historical record in the human record. So that is worrisome to me. I mean, I think it's fine to do what you want based on your own ethical choices, based on what you care about, but to recommend that diet for other people based on no data, I think is worrisome to me. You know, one of the problems of nutrition science, and one of the reasons that we're kind of in the terrible condition that we are today in terms of American health, is that nutrition science really, it really ignores history. It's a field that was born in the 1950s, and if you read thousands of nutrition studies like I have, they all telescope back to a few important studies that were done in 1950. And that's, you know, when in fact those studies were very weak because nutrition science was just kind of being born. And they ignore history. And one of the things that I did for my research was really to go back and look at cookbooks and journals and history books, and, you know, and to realize, you know, that the extent to which meat was not only eaten, but adored, craved beyond all other foods. Meat is what made you virile and made you strong. The images of witches in literature were always plant eaters, and they were always, they were considered like haggard and thin, and, you know, meat is what made men virile, and to be feared. That's why the warriors ate. In fact, in that Maasai warrior is the warriors who ate the meat. The women were actually given more plant food because they did not have to go out and fight or hunt. So, you know, I think there's just a great deal of historical data going back from those friezes in the Parthenon, you know, to Athena laying down a fat goat and the chine of a great wild hog rich in lard for Odysseus, to Isaiah prophesizing in the Old Testament that the Lord would make unto all people a feast of fat things full of marrow, to Pip's theft of a pork pie in Great Expectations. I mean, you cannot find a Victorian novel where a family is sitting down to a salad for dinner. And, you know, Pip did not steal a head of broccoli. He stole a pork pie. So, you know, if you consult history, you just find a rich record of the kinds of foods that humans used to eat. And I really feel that nutrition science has ignored this history, really at the peril of our good health. And that's it. I think I'm not even going to use all my time, but thank you very much.
Seven minutes for John Mackey, and
wait.
then we're going to have a final vote.
Wait till I
yes.
queue up here. I think it's kind of ironical that Ms. Teicholz doesn't accept epidemiological evidence, but she's prepared to go back and read literature to prove her points. I just think that's pretty weird. She says calories don't matter. Gary Taub says the same thing. Don't believe it. Calories matter. We're fatter because we eat more calories today. And you can see this 25% increase since 1970, resulting in increasing obesity. This is a standard American diet. It's about 33% of the calories are from fat. It's 54% processed foods, 32%, almost a third of the calories are from animal foods. The healthiest foods, the whole food, plant foods, are only 15%. And that's what's wrong with our diet. We need to get that probably up, and I'm arguing to about 90%. Here's the diet that I think results in vibrant health and longevity, a 90+% whole foods plant-based diet. I want to repeat some of the arguments I made against the low-carb, high-animal foods diet. Contrary to what she says, meat consumption has gone up 70% since 1940. Yes, red meat has gone down, chicken has gone up, but overall meat consumption has climbed radically. Cheese consumption has gone up 1,000%. We had this disagreement about nutrient density, and that's because my nutrient density research is based on density per calorie. Hers is based on density per gram. Well, we can only eat about 2,000 calories a day, a normal male. And if you get those 2,000 calories from animal foods, you're not going to get the same nutrient density if you eat those 2,000 calories from whole plant foods. As you can see, the whole plant foods rock and roll in nutrient density. The animal foods are laggards. Again, she may dismiss this information, but she doesn't offer any of her own observational studies that show that a low-carb, animal foods-based diet leads to longer life, where there's a number of studies that show it leads to shorter lives. Low-carbohydrate diets associated with a 31 increase in deaths from all causes. Each 13% increased risk of dying for each 2 to 3 ounce serving of red meat that you eat per day. A 60% chance of increased risk of cardiovascular events occurred to those adhering better to a low-carb, high-protein diet. Here you see that graphically represented. 1,000+ studies confirm red meat and processed meat increase the risk of colon cancer. 1,000 studies. Case for the whole plant foods diet. The longest-lived peoples in the world, the Blue Zone, read the books. They are plant-based eaters. Are they vegans? No. But they eat mostly plants, supplemented with small quantities of animal foods. And I think that's how humans evolved, by the way. We were gatherers and hunters. And the chimpanzees are 95%. We share 99% of the DNA with chimpanzees. They're 95% vegan. We share 98% of the same DNA with gorillas, and they're 100% vegan. I mean, all the primate species, all the great apes, are primarily plant eaters eating small quantities of animal foods. It's foolish to think we are somehow or another different. We're not. We're plant eaters who eat small quantities of animal foods, and that diet helps us to flourish and increases our longevity and our resistance to diseases. She dismisses the Seventh-day Adventist health study. Dr. Furman tried to demonstrate that this was a much more controlled study than normal because these cohorts have the same religion, they don't smoke, they don't drink. Diet is the relevant indicator, and the vegans are thinner and outlive by a long shot. In fact, this is the longest-lived cohort ever discovered in modern times. She dismisses Dean Ornish, but he's reversed heart disease. Our total health immersion in Whole Foods Market has been amazing. This is one reason I so much believe in this program, because I've seen it help so many of our people. 3,000 team members have been through this program. Hundreds of them have been able to reverse their diseases if they are adherent to the diets. And you know what? This is saving our company. We're self-insured. It's saving our company tens of millions of dollars a year. That's how important this is. When people can reverse their diabetes, we begin to save $50,000 on each one of them. Everybody here know what confirmation bias is? Yep. Francis Bacon said, the human understanding when it was once adopted an opinion, either as being the received opinion or as being agreeable to itself, draws all things else to support and agree with it. As Dr. John McDougall says, people never get tired of hearing good things about their bad habits. Nina says, eat butter, drink milk whole, and feed it to the whole family. Stock up on creamy cheeses, offal and sausage, and yes, bacon. None of these foods has been demonstrated to cause obesity, diabetes, or heart disease. I say it's confirmation bias. I say she's saying what people want to hear, and it's selling a lot of books. America is fat and sick and is dying from dietary and lifestyle diseases. The solution is simple. If people would adopt a whole foods 90% plus, 90% all the way up to 100% plant-based diet, we would see the obesity crisis eliminated. We would see type 2 diabetes disappear. We would see heart disease disappear. People would live to be in their 90s and 100s, and they would not contract these diseases. A low-carb, all these clinical studies have ever proven that she likes to recite is that a low-carb diet can lose weight in the short term. And it can do better than a so-called low-fat diet, which is still 30% fat and full of refined carbohydrates. It can do better than that. But it can't do better when it goes head-to-head, or when it finally goes head-to-head, and we have these interventional studies that she so much wants. We'll see that the low-carb diet does not measure up. Nina is telling people exactly what they want to believe, that butter, meat, cheese, and bacon and eggs are good for them. However, these foods are not good for people. Instead, she creates this straw man of the low-fat diet versus the low-carb diet, and doesn't really prove her point, in my opinion. Each of us has the potential to be healthy, fit, and lean. We should be able to live well past 100 years in good health and disease-free. That's the goal that I have for myself, and I know it's anecdotal data. You can dismiss it if you want to, but I weigh exactly the same as I weighed when I was in high school. My cholesterol is 135. My blood pressure is 105/70. I've never been healthier. I don't have any traces of heart disease. I know this diet works. I urge you to give it serious consideration. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, John. All right. Please don't go away. Iris, you were going to announce something with respect to the final voting. Please come up and tell us. What? Oh, please do. Go ahead. This woman is in charge of the final voting.
So a few changes to the final voting process. So there are now two voting boxes. Please line up in row of 2. The voting cards are now at the table. So please choose the vote that you want and insert it into the voting box. Black is in favor of John. Red is in favor of Nina. And the index card is for undecided.
Okay, remember, the resolution is an animal foods low-carb centered diet is unhealthy compared with a 90% plus plant-based diet that excludes sugar and refined grain products. I'll read it again. An animal foods low-carb centered diet is unhealthy compared with a 90+% plant-based diet that excludes sugar and refined grain products. Any questions about the resolution? Please go and get online to do the voting. Thanks very much. Tally of the votes. That's part of the sprint this evening. Nina and John, would you come up? We're going to determine who gets the Tootsie Roll tonight. Nina, would you come up for a moment? I have to say that as votes go, it was quite close, just a qualitative observation, but let me give you the actual tally. Interestingly enough, those who were for the resolution that an animal foods low-carb centered diet is unhealthy compared with a 90% plant-based diet that excludes sugar and refined grain products, those who were for the resolution as defended by John Mackey were initially 37.4% of the vote. And those who were against were 45.2%. So John was in the minority. However, he picked up a few more points. He went from 37.4 to 41%. So he picked up 3.6 percentage points. The against went from 45.2 to 46.6, an extremely close evening, almost a dead heat, but I have to award the Tootsie Roll to John Mackey. He beat Nina Teicholz by 2 percentage points. Again, this was our sprint. Congratulations, John, on your win. 2 percentage points. Congratulations, Nina, on picking up extra votes as well. Nina went from 1.6, but again, for the marathon, read the books. Thanks very much.
Oh, I'm sorry.